Well, speaking of questions, the big question is all about the costings, and after coming under sustained pressure, the Coalition this week released a 7-page document outlining how it plans to save more than $31 billion over 4 years. $5 billion is expected to come from cutting 12,000 jobs from the public service. But a report released today claims the cuts could cause a recession in Canberra, where most of the country's federal public servants reside. The left-leaning think tank, the Australia Institute, produced the report, and its Executive Director, Richard Dennis, joins us now from the nation's capital. Good morning to you, Richard Dennis. I think this particular research paper, Cut, taking a cue from Kevin Rudd's speeches of recent weeks. There's the suggestion, obviously, which we've heard about recently from all sorts of sources, that 12,000 jobs may be going, but this particular research paper says that's just a starting point. What grounds do you have for suggesting that we may be seeing even further cuts than that 12,000 number?
Well, of course. I mean, our paper is based on the Shadow Treasurer's statement that at least 12,000 jobs will go. He's been adamant they'll all go in Canberra. And if you take 12,000 pay packets out of a local economy, then of course you're going to have an impact on the private sector. You're going to see 12,000 fewer pay packets buying groceries, buying lunch, buying coffee. You're going to see much smaller demand for the business services, IT services, for example. With fewer people employed, there'll be fewer upstream jobs and fewer downstream jobs. And we estimate around 5,000 jobs will go from the private sector if the Abbott government are successful in taking 12,000 jobs out of Canberra.
Now, given that the public sector has grown by some 20,000 people since Labor took over from the Coalition, is there not scope there for the public sector to in fact be trimmed?
Oh, well, there's two issues there. One, it's been shown that the public sector hasn't grown by that 20,000 figure. We deal with that in the paper, and some of the fact-checking organisations have been similarly critical of that claim. But second, I haven't said that an incoming government shouldn't be able to cut public servants if they want to. All our report does is spell out what the consequences of that will be. So remember when Ford said it was going to shut down its plant for the loss of some 1,200 jobs, 1,200 jobs, there was a national debate about, what does that mean for Melbourne if 1,200 jobs go from Ford? Well, we're talking about 12,000 jobs, 10 times as many jobs being promised to be removed by an incoming government. And actually the title refers to Tony Abbott, who recently said jobs, jobs, jobs. Well, it seems that not all jobs are created equally, but anyone who thinks that 1,200 jobs going from Ford in Melbourne will have knock-on effects in the private sector should well understand that taking 12,000 jobs out of Canberra will have knock-on effects on the Canberra economy.
Well, the Coalition has factored in savings of some $5 billion over 4 years by making these sorts of cuts. If that were not to go ahead, would this not then leave the Coalition, should they come into power, with a major deficit and issues of trying to find savings elsewhere?
Oh, absolutely. But, clearly I think the Coalition are of the view that announcing they'll cut jobs in Canberra is a politically popular way to fund some of their spending promises. If they can't make those cuts, or they can't make them all in Canberra, then they'll have to find it in other ways. But it is very important that we actually push the Coalition before the election on the detail of this, because it actually looks, and our report makes the point, that it'll be very hard to remove 12,000 jobs through natural attrition in Canberra alone. And we estimate that if the 12,000 cuts are spread out around the country just on the natural attrition, then you'd see around 1,000 or more than 1,000 jobs going in Queensland, more than 1,000 jobs going in New South Wales, and more than 1,000 jobs going in Victoria. Because while a lot of public servants live in Canberra, there's a lot of public servants spread out around the country as well. So if they're going to rely on natural attrition, then public servants in Queensland resign as well.
Now, should the ALP win, which is looking increasingly unlikely, but should they win, it's also been the case that they've foreshadowed cuts to the public sector as well. So it looks unlikely that we'll be able to avoid this sort of an approach.
Look, that's right, and again we discussed this in the paper. The ALP has announced that they'll make cuts, but those 12,000 cuts promised by the coalition are in addition to the ALP cuts. By definition, they have to be additional to the ALP cuts, because otherwise they wouldn't be additional savings to help fund the coalition's additional promises. So yes, the ALP has announced it will cut jobs, but the coalition has announced it'll cut 12,000 more than the ALP will. So we consider both in our report, but there's a big difference between taking 4,000 jobs out of an economy and taking 16,000 jobs out of an economy. Both will have an impact, but the coalition's cuts, if they're to be fully implemented in the promised manner, will have a devastating impact on the private sector here in Canberra, as well as the housing market and the construction market.
Executive Director of the Australia Institute, Richard Dennis, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.